So many years of catastrophe, more than 6 million refugees. It could be you and your family, forced from your home and your history.
We are the people, and this is our time. Stand up, sing out for Palestine.
Hello, I'm your host, Kathleen Wells, and welcome to Palestine Today, a radio program dedicated to the news about Palestine and all things regarding Palestinians. Joining me today from Gaza City is my co-host, British journalist and campaigning filmmaker. He told me to say campaigning. I don't know what that means exactly, but I'm going to ask him. Campaigning filmmaker, Harry Fear, who is based in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip. For the next hour, Harry and I will bring you the unfiltered truth about the situation in Palestine from the perspective of Palestinians who live there. You will not receive this truth anywhere else. You will get it here at KCAA. So I encourage everyone who wants to know about Palestine and what's really going on in the region, as opposed to what you get in the mainstream media. I encourage everyone to turn into KCAA and listen to Palestine Today with me and my co-host, Harry Fear. We have a great show prepared for you today. We have a fabulous guest. But first, let me say that our weekly show is sponsored by the Washington Report on Middle East Affairs, Playgrounds for Palestine, and Mr. Henry Clifford. So, welcome, Harry. How are you today?
I'm great. I'm very happy to be in Gaza talking to you, Kathleen. Welcome to all of our listeners around the world, and thank you to our sponsors for making this exciting show possible.
Well, you're actually in Gaza now. In fact, the first 3 shows you weren't in Gaza, you were in Egypt. So, Harry, give us the latest news from Palestine.
Well, as always, it's difficult exactly how to select this, but I have my own tastes and styles. One thing which I think is quite significant is that the hacktivist group Anonymous, that I'm sure our listeners will recognize because they operate as a kind of very strange, fluid organization around the world, they have continued, or they certainly have reinitiated their Opt Israel, hashtag OP Israel, their cyber warfare campaign against Israel. Now, this started when Israel attacked Gaza last November, but it's now continued, and they have, or some of the members of the group, the collective Anonymous, have said that they're going to erase Israel from the internet. They have allegedly leaked thousands of confidential Israeli officials' details onto the internet, have taken down the Mossad's website, and etc. So this is of some significance, as we know in this day and age, what goes on online is of so much significance, and much warfare is also online. So we should pay attention to that. So that's the Anonymous hacktivist group. Just today, an 11-year-old Palestinian was run over by an Israeli military vehicle in Bethlehem. He was critically injured. Now, today is the 37th marking of Land Day, which basically is a Palestinian annual event looking to express, if you like, outrage at the further confiscation of parts of Palestinian territory, which took place 37 years ago. And so today, Israel, or the Israeli military, has clashed with Palestinians, using tear gas, rubber-coated bullets, and etc. And interestingly, just in the last week since our last show, Israel has admitted that it allocates just less than 1% of land for Palestinians. So it's actually become even more blatant in its discrimination in terms of land theft and how it treats the territory it occupies. It admits that it has allocated less than 1% of land for the Palestinians. Some other significant things have taken place today, in this last week. Yesterday, Irish activist Tommy Donnellan, who was filming in the West Bank, was shot with a rubber bullet in his arm. This is an international shot directly by an Israeli soldier with a rubber-coated bullet. The aid convoy, which we talked about last week, which was unable to get into Egypt to make its way to Gaza, has still not been able to get into Egypt. Various bits of mis and disinformation about why that has happened, but we understand that Egypt has refused to let in the convoy, not necessarily the president or a ministry, but certainly the security personnel on the ground at the border have refused to let the aid convoy in until Israel approves it. We understand that from members of the convoy. Kathleen, have you seen the film Five Broken Cameras?
Yes, I have. I watched it on the internet, and I know that he was the filmmaker was nominated for an Academy Award.
I want everyone to feel really encouraged to watch that, because I think it's an absolutely amazing piece of work, a collaboration between Israeli and Palestinian, mainly Palestinian, two filmmakers. And in this devastating documentary, Five Broken Cameras, which you can watch on YouTube, in fact, full length, you see the devastating arresting of Palestinian children. And that's going on this week in numbers since our last show.
Yeah, I'd like to have... Oh, I'd like to have the filmmaker the Palestinian filmmaker on this show as a guest.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's do it. I think he is a very special person. Just hundreds of meters from where I am is the Mediterranean Sea, and Israel has made explicitly clear that it will sink any boats that go 3 nautical miles out farther away from the Gazan coastline. So a new level of explicitity with regard to its policy on the naval blockade. At the same time, something of final significance, Kathleen. We understood that Turkey is in some way trying to make moves towards normalizing relations with Israel after Israel apologized for any mistakes made in the May 2010 raid on the Gaza aid flotilla, which saw the killing, in fact, of around 10 Turkish citizens, one Turkish US citizen, actually. But anyway, the point is that Erdogan, the premier of Turkey, has made it clear that there are 3 conditions for which he will accept the normalization of relations with Israel. One of these conditions is the Israeli state moving towards the lifting of the blockade of Gaza. And he said, Erdogan, said that he plans to visit Gaza to monitor the status of the blockade. Hamas here in Gaza, the ruling government in Gaza, elected 7 years ago, has welcomed the apology by Israel to Turkey. And Turkey has asked for $1 million per victim that was killed in that raid. And there are various issues. How much should be paid to Turkey per victim? And exactly if Israel will try and lift the blockade or make an attempt to lift the blockade, and any other conditions. So a commission has been set up between Turkey and Israel to see what happens in that respect. It is of international significance, regional significance, as you can hear, with Hamas weighing in with an opinion on it. And it's something of, I think, significance in regard to the Israel-Palestine conflict, actually.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that I want to highlight that you mentioned that you said today in Palestine is Land Day. Am I saying that right? Today they're celebrating Land Day, which reflects the confiscation of land that Israel has stolen from Palestine. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes, actually, it's not a general bit of land which is being demonstrated against. It's a very specific piece of land, actually, but I think now it's generally morphed into a general we're against the confiscation of our land rather than the original specificity.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's something. Our guest today is Professor Mazin Qumsiyeh. He's a Palestinian. He lives in Bethlehem, and I would like to bring him on because that's something that I specifically want to talk to him about is the 2-state solution. Is it possible or is it not possible? If Israel has confiscated so much of their land, how can the Palestinians have a 2-state solution? That's one of the questions that I want to ask him. But before I bring him on, I want to introduce our guest, and I'm so delighted to have him. Professor Mazin Qumsiyeh teaches and does research at Bethlehem, Verset, Al-Quds universities in occupied Palestine. He previously served on the faculties of the University of Tennessee, Duke, and Yale universities. He is chairman of the Palestinian Center for Rapprochement Between People and serves on the board of Al-Wawad Zakot Children's Theater Center in Ida refugee camp. He published several books, including Sharing the Land of Canaan, Human Rights and the Israel-Palestine Struggle, and Popular Resistance in Palestine, A History of Hope and Empowerment. He has given hundreds of talks around the world, published over 200 letters to the editor, and has written over 100 op-ed pieces and is interviewed extensively on TV and radio around the world. He currently resides in Bethlehem. Well, thank you, Professor Qumsiyeh, for joining us today on Palestine Today. Are you there?
Yes, thank you very much, and it's an honor to be with you on Land Day.
Welcome.
That was Harry welcoming you. Thank you very much. Well,
Thank you, Harry.
Yeah, well, and, Harry is in Gaza. You're in Bethlehem. Is that correct?
Yes, and it's an honor to be speaking to somebody in Gaza currently, as obviously this is very important for us, that we all connect with people around the world, and especially here in Palestine, where the occupation has tried to fragment us and put us in these different cantons or enclaves. As you know, me as a Palestinian cannot go to Gaza. I cannot even go to Jerusalem, which is only 4 or 5 miles away from where I am.
In fact, I didn't know that you're not able to go to Gaza. I didn't know that. I just learned something. I was aware of the fact that Palestinians were precluded from going to two mosques. What is the name of the mosque? It's losing me, but I know...
The Dome of the Rock, Al-Aqsa Mosque.
All holy sites in Jerusalem, are off limits to most Palestinians, because Israel has created a system of apartheid where they set up basically a permit system similar to the one that existed in South Africa at the time of apartheid. The idea is to prevent Palestinians from moving around, from connecting with each other, from living normal lives, and to force us out of our land, something that the Zionist Project have been doing for the past 130 years.
Mm-hmm. So, Professor Qumsiyeh, what I'd like to ask you, for those listeners who are unfamiliar with the Israel-Palestine issue, believe me, here in America, in the mainstream media, we don't get the accurate characterization, the accurate analysis of that situation. So what I'd like to ask you is to provide sort of a primer or lay a foundation so that listeners unfamiliar with the situation can get an understanding. So, and you can start at any point time frame that you think is relevant. So give listeners that primer, please.
It is a rather simple situation. It's not as complicated as what Aaron likes to portray. What we have here is a situation where in the 19th century, the age of empires was ending and nation-states were created. And in those nation-states in Europe, like Belgium and France and Germany and so forth, there was discrimination against minorities. One of these minorities was Jewish, people who are Jewish. And those people, like any people who are discriminated against, choose one of two ways to respond, like any human being or any animal for that matter, is fight or flight. And in North America, for example, the blacks were discriminated against, and some of them, like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and so forth, chose to fight the system, whereas in the case of some blacks...
You know what, Professor Qumsiyeh, I want people to really hear you, and I hear a lot of static. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a break, and maybe we can try you on Skype, because I hear a lot of static in the reception. So why don't we take a break, and because I really want people to get this. I mean, I think this is so important. So why don't we go to a break, and and I'll talk to you off air, and we'll try to fix the connection, okay?
Let's do it.
We'll be right back.
Catastrophe, more than 6 million refugees. It could be you and your family, forced from your home and your history.
We are the people and this.
Are you fascinated by the Middle East, but worried that U.S. foreign policy may lead yet to another war? Do you care about civil rights? For the past 30 years, the Washington Report on Middle East Affairs has brought its readers the real news, minus the corporate media spin. Read about Palestinians trying to survive the world's largest occupation. Learn how your hard-earned tax dollars fund that illegal occupation. Find out how much your members of Congress has received from pro-Israel PACs, and much, much more. Visit the Washington Report's website, www.wrmea.org, or call 888-881-5861 to request a free sample copy. Better yet, subscribe. It's only $29 for 9 issues. Mention Palestine today and get a bonus gift. Playgrounds for Palestine is a non-for-profit 501c3 organization dedicated to upholding the Palestinian child's rights to play. This is a right enshrined in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. We operate through a volunteer board and staff, the generosity of our supporters, and a lot of heart. To date, Playgrounds for Palestine has constructed 15 playgrounds in Palestine, as well as refugee camps in Lebanon and Syria. To contribute to this most worldly cause, please go to our website at www.playgroundsforpalestine.org or send a check to Playgrounds for Palestine, P.O. Box 559, Yardley, Pennsylvania 19067 at www.playgroundsforpalestine.org.
Can you smell the aroma of sweet, delicious fruit and flaky, melt-in-your-mouth crust? What is that? It's Cobblermania. Cobblermania is a specialty dessert company founded several years ago that sells delicious fruit cobblers that are baked daily and sweetened with diabetic-friendly agave. Agave, you ask? Yes, it's like sugar, but not sugar, and better than sugar. Cobblermania cobblers are sold at the Torrance, Hollywood, Culver City, San Dimas, Marina Del Rey Farmers Market. Also, apple and peach are sold daily at the Golden Bird in Los Angeles. You know Golden Bird that sells the fried chicken? At 83rd and Western, daily apple and peach cobblers. And yes, guess what? They're coming to the Pomona Fairplex Truck Fest. In fact, they're there right now, Thursdays from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. at Gate 1. Some of the favorites: peach, apple, mango, blueberry peach, blackberry, blackberry, apple, white peach. If you go to the Pomona Truck Fest Gate 1 on Thursdays from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. and mention me, Kathleen, you'll get something special. You don't want to miss it. I've had them. They're delicious.
Southern California's Inland Talk Express is KCAA News Talk 1050.
So many years of catastrophe, more than 6 million refugees. It could be you and your family, forced from your home and your history.
We are the people, and this is our time. Stand up, sing out for Palestine.
No matter your faith or community, this is a crime against humanity. Gaza turned into a prison camp, apartheid war divides the West Bank.
We are the people, and this is our time. Stand up, sing out for Palestine.
We'll break down the wall, freedom for Palestine. Demand justice for all, freedom for Palestine. Enough illegal occupation, violence and racial segregation. All religious communities unite. Freedom is a human right.
We are the people, and this is our time. Stand up, sing out for Palestine.
We'll break down the wall. Freedom for Palestine.
Welcome back. We were just dealing, we gave you a little bit of music for a little, we did the music for a little longer because we were working on getting Professor Qumsiyeh connected onto Skype because the audio connection with his phone was not clear. So now we've got him. So, Professor Qumsiyeh, can you continue on with what you were saying, please?
Yes, I'm sorry about that. What I was saying is that basically blacks in North America also responded in some ways similar to Jews in Europe. And there were some blacks who went to Africa and created a new country, and they called it Liberia in order to escape discrimination. And certainly some Jews in Europe thought that one way to do that is also to create a state in Palestine called Israel. The problem, of course, is that Palestine was not an empty land. There were people here. Christians and Muslims lived here for hundreds of years, and we are descendants of Canaanites who lived here for thousands of years. So when the Zionist movement sent two rabbis, for example, to Palestine in the late 19th century to look it over and see how suitable it is for a Jewish state, the two rabbis sent a message back, a telegram back to Vienna, and the telegram simply said, the bride is beautiful, but she is married to another man. In other words, it's a wonderful country for a Jewish state, but there are people here, and what are we going to do with them? And the answer was very obvious, that we had to go. We Palestinians had to go. So the struggle from then on has been a struggle to remove the native Palestinians from their land and create this thing called the Jewish state of Israel, basically on top of Palestine. In the intervening period, I don't want to make this a history lesson, but in the intervening period, we have had 7 million of us become refugees or displaced people. It's the largest post-World War II remaining refugee crisis in history. And the people who remain here, including me and my family and people in Bethlehem, in Gaza, where Harry is, and all these other places, are living basically in shrinking cantons, which together are now less than 8%, actually. The numbers keep shrinking, but less than 8% of the historic Palestine that we are allowed to continue to live in temporarily until, of course, Israel takes over all of it, which is what they have intended all along, to make life for us so miserable that we leave. This is in a nutshell what we call the diagnosis or the etiology of the problem. Of course, it has many symptoms, and we can talk about those if you want, including land confiscation, building walls on our land, imprisoning us, political prisoners, stealing our land, and the violence, of course, and the resistance, the violence of the occupiers, and the resistance from the native people.
Okay, Harry, I think you have a question.
How do you see the position differing from, number one, the apartheid system in South Africa, and number two, the genociding of the First Nations peoples in North America?
Well, every historical situation is unique, but also because we are humans, every historical situation is connected. In particular, the two examples that you mentioned are very important. I lived in the United States for many years, actually. I have a U.S. citizenship, and so I am also very familiar with what happened there. And I just came back from South Africa, where I visited with the local people. I visited the townships to study the situation, understand what went on there, and what, by the way, still goes on, because apartheid is not completely ended in South Africa. But in any case, there are some similarities and some differences. The similarities are rather obvious. There was a group of people who said that they were inspired by God to settle in those places, and that this is to them the promised land, and that they wanted to improve it, and that they are on a mission from God to create this wonderful civilization, whether in South Africa or in North America and South America or in Palestine here, and that they had to develop the land, and that the people who already live on this land were primitive, quote-unquote savages. And in my visit to South Africa and the Voortrekker Museum, for example, they explained how they had to circle the wagons and defend themselves against those savages who attack them for no obvious reason other than, of course, that they are being white, beautiful settlers. This is the language that they used, and this is the language that continues to be used in Palestine every day. Now, there are some differences. In the case of North America and South America, actually, there was large-scale genocide. There are estimates of perhaps 20 million, and some people say even 100 million Native Americans who perished as a result of diseases brought by the Europeans, actual killings or depriving them of their livelihood, starvation, and so on. In South Africa, the blacks were kept as basically slave labor, basically labor for minimal wage in the gold mines, diamond mines, and so on, that were owned by whites and still continue to be owned by the elite white community. In Palestine, the Zionist movement did something kind of intermediate between these different things. They had used, for example, the idea that we need Palestinian slave labor, but we need it only for the first few years, maybe 2 decades, and then we really don't need Palestinians. We want a pure Jewish state. So they accommodated Palestinians for a short while, and as labor, and now they don't need that anymore, and so they even import labor from Thailand or other Eastern Asian countries, and they have a highly developed economy also that doesn't require much labor now. So I think there are some differences. In the case of South Africa, the blacks were kept in townships, in places outside of the main development areas for whites. We are actually, as Palestinians, many of us are kept in refugee camps in Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan, other countries. Few refugee camps are in Palestine, in Gaza, and in the West Bank, for example. Gaza actually is dramatic. 1 million of the 1.5 million people in Gaza are refugees or displaced people. And I could go on about some other differences, peculiarities to each system, but in essence, all of these three systems, European colonization, North America and South America, and in Africa, South Africa with the apartheid system, and in Palestine, they're all colonial settler systems which dehumanize the natives to justify removing them from their land.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, I think that Desmond Tutu has said that, no, not Desmond Tutu, I think it was Nelson Mandela, said that the situation in Palestine is worse than the apartheid in South Africa. So, Professor Qumsiyeh, let me ask you a question. What do you say to people who say, particularly in the West, particularly in America, that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East? What is your response to that?
Well, there is an international convention on the issue. There's something called the International Convention for the Suppression and Punishment of the Crime of Apartheid and Racial Discrimination. And I urge your listeners and everybody to look it up and read about it, because Israel clearly fulfills all the requirements of being an apartheid state. Ironically, South Africa under apartheid before the 1990 to 93 transition used to describe itself as the only democracy in Africa. And at some level one could consider some elements of democracy in South Africa under apartheid. Yes, they had a parliament and they had white elections and so on, but it's not a democracy for the people who live in South Africa, or the people who were removed from their lands to accommodate the white apartheid system. Similarly, we have here a country, the State of Israel, that rules over all of historic Palestine from the River Jordan to the Mediterranean. And this country has a set of laws that are very unique and that are very discriminatory against non-Jews living here, the natives basically. And I could speak to just give you a couple of examples of these laws. For example, Israel says any Jew in the world and any convert to Judaism is a member of the nation of Israel, is a member of this nation, and is entitled to automatic citizenship. All they have to do is show up at the border and prove they are Jewish or that they have converted to Judaism and that they hold no other religion. Then they would be allowed immediate citizenship in this country, whereas millions of Palestinian refugees who come from these areas, from Jerusalem, from Haifa, Nazareth, so on, are not allowed to return to their homes and lands simply because they are not Jewish. This is just simply one of the Israeli laws that make it an apartheid state. There are laws that make it an apartheid state on many other areas, including marriage, for example. Intermarriage with Palestinians would mean that people do not have a right to live together. On movement, any Jew in the world can come to Jerusalem and settle in Jerusalem, whereas a Palestinian like me living just a couple of miles, a few miles from Jerusalem, is not allowed to enter the city where I taught even high school. Even, by the way, with my American passport, I mentioned earlier that I'm also a U.S. citizen. My American passport does not allow me to enter Jerusalem simply because I'm Palestinian Christian and I'm not Jewish. If I was Jewish, as I said, I would be more than welcome to enter and even live in Jerusalem. I could go on, of course. There's land ownership laws that are racist and discriminatory against Palestinians and so on. So to say that Israel is a democracy is just a way of hyperbole that is totally disconnected from the reality here.
Now, I know that you're a Christian Palestinian, and many Americans, many in the West, do not realize that there are actually Christian Palestinians. Can you touch on that in fact, I was talking to someone about it earlier, and they said that many people in the West believe that Christian Palestinians leave Palestine because they have a fear or there's some issue with Muslims, and that's not the issue. Can you clarify that for my listeners, please?
Yes. First time I must emphasize, because one time I talked to a person, he said, so you are Christian, when did your family convert to Christianity? And I kind of had to laugh, because I said to him simply, well, we are the original Christians here. Jesus was here, and that's where he taught first. And so we are the original Christians before Christianity spread to the rest of the world, including your country. So we are the original Christians that have lived here from the time of Jesus. And my family certainly has been Christian to our records, at least since the 3rd century A.D., probably before that because of the discrimination by the Roman Empire. They were not allowed to be public. But in any case, so for hundreds of years, 2,000 years, people of Christian faith lived here. And they lived here regardless of who the rulers are and what their fellow native people, what religions they adopted. And certainly when Christianity came, many of us converted to Christianity from previous religions, whether it's paganism or the Mosaic law of Moses or any of those other religions. And when Islam came in the 6th, 7th century A.D., many Palestinian Canaanitic people converted to Islam. The country became predominantly Muslim as a number of people or percentage of people, but that didn't mean that actually that we were repressed or anything like that. In fact, in many parts of the country, Christians were the leaders of their communities. Christians, for example, there are more churches in Jerusalem than there are mosques, and then there are synagogues. And this has been historically true for the past, few hundred years. So to say that there was discrimination is really, again, a form of hyperbole by the Zionists to try and explain why we Palestinians are suffering. Why we are suffering is because we have occupation, colonization. We have our lands being stripped from us by the Zionist movement, by the State of Israel. The economy is terrible here in Bethlehem, for example, 30% unemployment. Israel even controls the tourism industry. They don't allow tourists to be guided by Palestinians. They must be Israeli tourists that they give license to. They don't give licenses to Palestinian tour guides, and so on. So even the tourist industry is being usurped by the State of Israel, as was the agricultural industry, as was the other natural resources in Palestine, water, and so on. This is the reason why Palestinian Christians and Muslims are suffering, because, as I said, we have a system of discrimination against non-Jews that exists throughout the historic land of Palestine.
Do you think that there is some problem with Islam which is causing some kind of prolonging of the Israel-Palestine conflict? Because I understand that Islamophobia, or so-called anti-Muslim prejudice, is something which certainly exists inside Israel and among Israel's supporters in the West. I mean, what role does Islam play in prolonging the conflict, in your estimation?
I don't think there's an issue with religions here. I don't think the problem was religious. You know, my grandfather's friend in school was Jewish. My friends in school were Muslims. They were Armenian, for example, Armenian Christian. Armenians came here after what happened to them in Turkey during the First World War and so on. So we welcomed immigrants. We also were a tolerant, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multicultural society. The Muslims here were much more tolerant than, for example, Christians are towards Muslims in Europe or anywhere else. The idea of discrimination, of course, when there's a majority culture and a minority, there's always some elements of discrimination. There's no question about it. I'm not going to deny that whenever there's a majority in rule, that the minority does not have to fight for its rights. We do that. But as I said, relative to other countries, we had hardly any of the problems that today even exist in Europe or North America. In the United States, for example, there are still discrimination against blacks, against people who are different, also against Muslims. So I think, for us, as Palestinian Christians, we need to tell the truth. And the truth, what Palestinian Christian leaders, for example, issued in the Kairos document, and I urge your listeners to look it up, Kairos Palestine, K-A-I-R-O-S, Kairos Palestine. It's a document by all the Palestinian Christians here. Something unusual, by the way, that we different Christian denominations agree to one document, but nevertheless, all the Christian denominations here agreed to this document. And it's titled The Moment of Truth. It's a moment of truth to say what is the truth about the situation here and why do we have a problem. The problem is that in 1948, 530 Palestinian villages and towns were completely ethnically cleansed of their people. People were pushed out. Of those villages, around 10 or 15% were Christian villages, predominantly Christian Palestinian villages that were pushed out by the State of Israel to make space for this thing called the Jewish State of Israel. This is the truth that we have to be cognizant of and that we have to understand, as many even now Israeli Jews recognize, that the original sin of Zionism was the ethnic cleansing of Palestine.
And how, Professor, does one try and address that? I mean, the Nakba, the war of independence for Israel, the catastrophe for Palestinians, that was this ethnic cleansing. Is that something which has to be addressed when the conflict resolves, or is that something which has to be conceded to history?
No, of course, human rights cannot be conceded, and we know that from struggles in other countries, that as long as human rights are being violated, you cannot have peace. So the best way to have peace is through justice. And this is what Palestinian Christians and Muslims, and increasingly, by the way, Israeli Jews also, who join us in the struggle. I myself was arrested, by the way, with Israeli Jews fighting to retain our land, standing in front of bulldozers and so forth. So all of us, all humans, regardless of our religious or other backgrounds, say that basically the way to arrive at peace is through justice, through human rights, through international law. If we want to address, for example, the issues in Palestine, Israel, I mentioned earlier, we know the diagnosis. The diagnosis is racism. So what we have to do is to fight this and to work for a system whereby people are treated equally, regardless of their religious persuasion or background and so on. This is basically articulated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So if we need a roadmap to peace, my recommendation would be to look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a reasonable, rational document for us to arrive at peace here. It includes all the elements we need, including, by the way, the rights of refugees, because in Article 13 it says everybody has the right to leave their country and to come back to their country, and so on. It has articles about religious discrimination, articles about not depriving people of their lands or their farms and their property, and it has articles about not torturing people, which Israel does regularly in Israeli prisons, about all these other things that we Palestinians have been asking for.
Okay, Professor Qumsiyeh, I'm actually going to open up the phone lines. How do you feel about taking questions?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm going to open up the phone lines, and actually, there's so much I want to ask you, actually. So I think I'm going to have you on again next week because you explained the situation perfectly, and I hope people are listening and understanding the situation. There's so much to touch on. So the call-in number is toll-free, 888-909-1050. If you have questions for Professor Qumsiyeh, please feel free to call in. Also, Professor Qumsiyeh, I'd like for you to touch on the two-state solution. I know that today marks Land Day, if I'm not mistaken, in Palestine. Talk about the two-state solution for me.
I think the issue is not whether we choose between one state or two states or confederations or binationalism or any of these things. There are many, many solutions, not one or two solutions. To me, the issue is whether the solution advocated will allow for respecting human rights. And if it doesn't allow for respecting human rights, like the refugee rights to return to their homes and lands, then obviously this will not work.
It will not work. The two-state solution will not work. So what's the alternative?
Well, I am not saying the two-state solution would not work. I'm saying that if it violates human rights, then obviously it cannot work. If we say we adopt a two-state solution, but we cannot allow the refugees to return to their homes and lands, then this will not work. If you allow a two-state solution which respects human rights and allows the return of the land to its rightful owners, then I think that would work. So I think people have to show me how a two-state solution would work in terms of human rights. And I'm not convinced that it could work in terms of human rights. But I could be proven wrong if somebody could show me how they would modify it so that it would accommodate basic human rights.
Well, the thing of it is, you say accommodating human rights entails returning the land that has been confiscated or stolen. So this is not going to happen. I mean, we realize this from just looking at how things have evolved over time. The whole point of Zionism, the whole point of this escapade was to confiscate the land that belongs to Palestine. So to return the land would be sort of like undermining the whole intent of Zionism. Am I accurate?
Well, in some level, yes. But of course, there is enough land in the world and enough land also in Palestine to accommodate everybody. You see, Israel does not argue that the return of the refugees will remove Jews from land that they now live in. That's not their argument. Their argument is that the return of refugees will upset the demographic balance and change the state of Israel back to be a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multicultural Palestine, and this to them is not acceptable. But it is not an issue of accommodation, because there has been some studies that show that you can return Palestinians without displacing Jews who came here and even settled on our land or even in our houses. It is possible to do that, because most of the Palestinian villages that were ethnically cleansed are still empty, actually. And the only problem may happen in the cities like Haifa and Jaffa and Jerusalem, where there are actual houses in which Jewish Israelis live in now that are Palestinian houses. But in those urban areas, if you offer somebody a house in another part of the city, they're willing to move. So I don't think it will be an issue with logistics of doing it. As I said, the only objection to doing it nowadays is basically racism, is the idea that we don't want Palestinians to come here because we want a Jewish state in which Jews run the affair of the country, and that's it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, we're going
Professor, you mentioned a report which said that the right of return would not abrogate the existing settlement of Israelis. Do you remember the name of that? Because I'm absolutely fascinated.
If you look up Dr. Salman Abu Sitta, Abusitta, Salman Abu Sitta, he did significant research on this subject with maps and coordinates and names of the villages. Everything else is well documented.
Okay, we're going to...
Fantastic, thank you.
Okay, sorry, Harry. I'm sorry. We're going to take a phone. I said I opened up the phone lines and the lines just lit up like gangbusters, right? So why don't we take a call from Elizabeth Mulcahy from Virginia. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi there. Thank you very much for taking my call. And Dr. Qumsiyeh, it's fascinating to listen to you. I have a question for you, but first, Mr. Fear referred earlier to rubber bullets. Would you also answer the question, are those rubber bullets, rubber-coated, or are they metal, steel bullets, and do they kill? And then my question for you directly is, twice you used the word fight. What is your approach to resistance, and do you lead any organizations or groups on resistance?
Okay, thank you. With regards to the types of weapons that Israel uses against Palestinians, Israel has been very innovative in developing certain weapons and technologies, and actually now they are even selling some of these technologies outside. As you may know, Israel is now the largest weapons exporter. Their largest economic input to the country is from weapons and security-related exports. And Israel even competes with the U.S. in exports, sometimes repackaging American technology as Israeli technology and selling it to countries like China and so forth. And these technologies range from everything like drones that shoot and kill people all the way down to their latest weapon, which is called the stink spray, which is a chemical composition that basically they spray it on Palestinians and on their houses, and it smells really bad, and it stays smelling bad and irritating for weeks sometimes. People cannot wash them off of their skin, basically, with the stink gun, as they call it in Hebrew, skunk, smell. But it's more than skunk, because skunk you can get rid of it after a day or two. But this is the simplest kind of technology. Everything in between, including what you mentioned, which is the so-called rubber-coated steel bullets. And I actually lost a friend for rubber-coated steel bullets. So Israel can kill with rubber-coated steel bullets. We brought a girl, for example, who lost her eye also to a rubber-coated steel bullet to Connecticut when I was living there. They shot her from a long distance, and they took her eye off. She was 7.5 years old when this happened, and she was walking with her mother in the streets of Gaza, on a holiday, actually. There was no demonstrations or anything. Israel is very innovative in trying different things to scare the Palestinians and force us out of our land. Now, with regards to resistance, which connects to this, because let me be clear that colonization cannot be done nicely. You cannot come to somebody's house and land, whether Native American or black in South Africa or anywhere else, and say to them, hey, I love your land and your house. Would you kindly leave because I want to take it over? That doesn't happen. Nice words do not get natives off their lands. So colonizers have to use violence. And, of course, violence is met by resistance. Now, when I mention resistance, people may be in their mind thinking of armed resistance. But in reality, in all situations, whether Native Americans or whether South African blacks or even Vietnamese, the majority of the resistance is nonviolent resistance, attempts to cling to your land, attempts to continue normal life, demonstrations, petitions, boycotts, and so on and so forth. Those are the kinds of resistance that Palestinians have engaged in for 130 years. And I wrote a book on the subject, and I could elaborate more on this, of course, but perhaps we want to take more questions. I myself, of course, joined the nonviolent resistance and go on demonstrations and events. Today there were actually a number of demonstrations in the West Bank and Gaza and inside 1948 areas and also around the world because of Land Day. And these were all nonviolent events that were met by Israeli violence when Israel controls the areas.
Okay, I want to thank you, Betty, for the phone call. Professor Qumsiyeh, we only have 2 minutes left, so I want to do some housekeeping, but I'm going to invite you back next week because there's so many issues that I want to touch on that we haven't been able to do so because of the time constraint. So would you like to come back next week, Professor?
Sure, and I encourage your listeners to get involved with boycott, divestment, sanctions, and with other nonviolent actions with us.
And I also encourage listeners to go to Professor Qumsiyeh's website, which is QUMSIYEH.org. I'll repeat that, QUMSIYEH.org. Check out his website. We'll have Professor Qumsiyeh next week. We're delighted to have him this week. There are more issues that we want to address. I want to thank our sponsor, Washington Report for Middle East Affairs, WRMEA.org. I want to thank PlaygroundsForPalestine.org. And Harry, do you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to, again, thank the professor for coming on. And for me, one of the striking things about having just arrived in Gaza a couple of days ago is, as I said earlier in the program, Gaza here is one big fact on the ground. Gaza is not going away anytime soon. And I think for us, we have to focus on what's positive, and in these non-violent resistance movements, BDS and the rest of it, including the Al-Rawad cultural resistance group that the professor is involved in, and take our hope from the Palestine-inspiring non-violent resistance and help them out.
Okay, so Professor Qumsiyeh, we'll have you again on next week. Thank you for this week.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll see you next week. Also, I'd like to mention that don't miss my Wednesday show, which is the Kathleen Wells Show at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And this Wednesday, my guest will be Rich Forer. His book, Breakthrough. Rich offers a new insight into the Israel-Palestine conflicts and asks Jews to take an inward journey. So don't miss my show this coming, April 3rd. My guest will be Rich Forer and his book, Breakthrough. And again, next week we'll have Professor Qumsiyeh again, and we'll touch on more issues. And I'll give more time for, I'll open up the phone line so we'll have more people call in. So thank you again for joining us on Palestine Today. We're delighted to have you, and join us next week when we will have Professor Qumsiyeh as a guest again from Bethlehem. and Harry Fear. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
More than 6 million refugees, it could be you and your family, forced from your home and your history.
We are the people, and this is our time. Stand up, sing out for Palestine.
No matter your faith or community, this is a crime against humanity. Gaza turned into a prison camp. Apartheid won't divide the West Bank.
We are the people, and this is our time. Stand up, sing out for Palestine.
You're on board KCAA's Inland Talk Express. KCAA, Loma Linda, 1050 AM, the station that leaves no listener behind.
From the KCAA Weather Center, I'm Chris Earl Phillips. For this afternoon, mostly sunny and a high of 76. Tonight, partly cloudy, low around 51. Tomorrow, chance of drizzle before 11. Mostly sunny and a high of 70. Tomorrow night, 20% chance of showers after 11. Mostly cloudy and a low around 49. On Monday, 20% chance of showers before 11. Mostly cloudy, gradually becoming sunny and a high near 69. Monday night, mostly clear, low around 49. On Tuesday, sunny and a high of 78. That's your weather forecast for this hour from the station that leaves no listener behind. NBC News Radio, AM 1050, KCAA.
This is the KCAA Community Calendar. The 101st consecutive annual Flower Show will take place Saturday, April 20th and Sunday, April 21st at the ESRI campus in Redlands, 380 New York Street. Features include a concert in the garden tour, and an uncommon plant sale. For more information, go to aboutredlands.com. Vintage Redlands, Thursday, April 26th at 6 p.m. is a self-guided wine and food tasting tour through historic downtown Redlands. Sample wines and appetizers from local restaurants and wineries, along with live entertainment at multiple stops along the tour. Proceeds benefit the Citrograph Scholarship Fund. For more information, call 888-494-9044. And that's your KCAA Community Calendar.
Earth